The plasma shackles burned against Vex Korath's wrists as the transport ship Morphdak descended through the crimson atmosphere of quarantine world Epsilon 7. Through the reinforced viewport, he watched the desolate landscape rush past a graveyard of failed civilizations where the hegemony dumped their most dangerous prisoners. "Look at the human," sneered Gactor, the massive Vrithian guard whose scales glistened with toxic secretions. "Still believes he matters." Vex said nothing. The other prisoners a collection of murderers, terrorists, and rebels from across the galaxy had learned to fear his silence over the past 3 months. The hegemony had made a mistake labeling him a simple saboteur. They'd captured him after he'd destroyed a mining operation on Kepler 4 for 2B. But they had no idea what he'd really been doing there. The transport shuddered as it landed with a bone impact. Through the commotion of disembarking prisoners, Vex caught sight of another human being dragged from a separate holding cell. The woman's auburn hair was matted with blood, her olive skin marked with interrogation burns, but her emerald eyes burned with unbroken defiance. "Commander Nix Valdris," she whispered as their paths crossed. "Terran Defense Corps. Vex Korath," he replied quietly. "Freelancer." The brief exchange was cut short as energy prods forced them into the processing line. Epsilon 7's prison compound stretched across the horizon like a metallic cancer, its towers reaching toward the blood-red sky. The facility housed over 2 million beings from 1,000 different worlds, all considered too dangerous for standard incarceration. Warden Zekthara, a towering ossified whose bone-plated head bore the scars of countless battles, addressed the new arrivals through a holographic projection. "Welcome to your final destination. Epsilon 7 has no guards inside the walls, no surveillance, no rules. You will live or die by your own devices. The energy barrier surrounding this facility is impenetrable. The wildlife is engineered to kill. Your only choice is how long you survive." As they were herded through the massive gates, Vex noticed something the hegemony had missed. The composition of the prisoner population had shifted dramatically over the past year. Where once violent criminals had dominated, now he saw military uniforms, resistance fighters, and political prisoners. The hegemony wasn't just dumping criminals anymore. They were disposing of threats to their expanding empire. The inner compound was a maze of improvised settlements, each controlled by different factions. The Coraxian clans held the eastern quadrant with their superior technology. The Nethys Collective had carved out territory in the industrial sector. Dozens of smaller groups fought for scraps in between, but it was the human settlement that caught Vex's attention. Tucked against the northern wall, barely 300 souls occupied a space that should have held thousands. They were the survivors of the hegemony's systematic campaign against Earth's colonies, scientists, soldiers, civilians who had refused to submit to alien rule. "You're the one who hit the Kepler station," said a grizzled man with cybernetic implants replacing his left eye and arm. "I'm Riker Thorne, former colonel, Earth Defense Force." "That was just the beginning," Vex replied, studying the makeshift fortifications. "How many here have military experience?" "About 60%. The rest are engineers, medics, technicians. But what's the point? We're trapped on a dead world." Vex smiled for the first time in months. "Colonel, I think you misunderstand our situation. The hegemony didn't just dump us here. They've created the largest gathering of dissidents in the galaxy. We're not trapped, we're assembled." As night fell over Epsilon 7, Vex stood atop the human settlement's highest tower, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, the hegemony's forces were crushing the last free worlds. But here, in this forgotten corner of space, the seeds of something unprecedented were taking root. The rebellion wouldn't begin with grand speeches or formal declarations. It would begin with a simple question that Vex posed to the gathering crowd below. "How many of you still remember what freedom feels like?" The answering roar shook the foundations of the compound. 3 months after his arrival, Vex had become something the hegemony never intended, a unifying force. The human settlement had quadrupled in size, as survivors from other factions sought refuge from the constant territorial wars. But more importantly, word was spreading through the prison's underground networks about the human who spoke of impossible things. "The Caraxians want to meet," announced Astrakelion, a former intelligence operative whose scarred face bore witness to her interrogation on Proxima Station. "Their war chief, Gruckmauler, is curious about your proposal." Vex nodded, checking the modified plasma cutter concealed beneath his makeshift armor. The meeting had been arranged for the neutral ground of the old processing center, where the rusted hulks of transport ships provided cover from the constant surveillance drones that still patrolled the outer perimeter. Gruckmauler arrived with a retinue of heavily armed warriors, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming with bioluminescent threat displays. The Caraxian war chief stood 3 meters tall, his mandibles clicking with barely contained aggression. "Human," he rumbled and accented. "Standard, you speak of unity, but unity requires strength. What strength do your soft species possess?" "The strength to survive what you cannot," Vex replied calmly. "How many of your warriors have died from radiation poisoning this month? How many have fallen to the plague mites in Sector 7? Gruckmauler's threat display dimmed slightly. The Caraxians were dying faster than any other faction, their aggressive nature making them excellent warriors but poor survivors in Epsilon 7's hostile environment. "The humans adapt," continued Vex. "We've developed treatments for 17 different toxins. Our engineers have created water purification systems that work in any biome. Our medics have treated over 200 non-human patients in the past month. And in return, we ask for your knowledge of hegemony military protocols. Your people were their enforcers before you were betrayed. You know their weaknesses." The meeting stretched for hours, with similar delegations from the Nethys Collective, the Saurian Enclaves, and even the mysterious Void Singers. Each faction brought their own expertise. The Nethys had maintained their quantum communication networks. The Saurians possessed detailed star charts of hegemony territory, and the Void Singers had developed stealth technology that could mask entire fleets. As the weeks passed, the impossible began to take shape. The various factions weren't just cooperating, they were integrating. Human medics worked alongside Caraxian bioengineers. Nethys quantum specialists shared encrypted communications with Saurian navigators. The Void Singers began teaching their mental disciplines to anyone willing to learn. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Lyra Voss, a former terraforming specialist, made a discovery that changed everything. Deep in the facility's abandoned laboratories, she found the remnants of the original research station that had once operated on Epsilon 7. "It's not just a prison world," she explained to Vex as they stood in the dust-covered facility. "This was a weapons research station. The hegemony has been using it to develop new forms of biological warfare." The implications were staggering. The energy barrier that surrounded the facility wasn't just to keep prisoners in it, was to prevent contamination from escaping. The hegemony had been testing their weapons on the prisoners, using them as unwitting subjects in their experiments. "There's more," Lyra continued, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "The research data is still here. Every biological agent they've developed, every weakness they've discovered in different species, it's all cataloged." Vex studied the massive databanks, his mind racing. "Can you extract it? With the right equipment?" "Yes. But Vex, this isn't just about weapons. This facility has a quantum transmitter powerful enough to reach any point in the galaxy. If we can restore it, we can coordinate with resistance cells throughout hegemony space." Vex finished. "How long do you need?" 6 months, maybe less if the Nethys help with the quantum calculations." That night, Vex called the first General Assembly in the facility's history. Representatives from every major faction gathered in the old transport bay, their various forms of respiration creating a symphony of biological diversity. The hegemony made a mistake, Vex began, his voice carrying across the vast space. They thought they were disposing of their enemies. Instead, they've created the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, a community of beings who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He gestured to the mixed crowd before him. Look around you. Every species, every culture, every form of life that has ever defied the hegemony is represented here. We are not prisoners. We are the galaxy's immune system, and it's time we started acting like it. The applause was thunderous, but Vex knew the real work was just beginning. War was coming to Epsilon 7, and when it arrived, they would be ready. The first hegemony inspection in 5 years arrived without warning. The massive dreadnought Thukmara descended through Epsilon 7's atmosphere like a metallic predator, its weapons array scanning the prison compound with mechanical precision. They are not following standard inspection protocols, observed Nyx Valdris, now serving as the rebellion's military coordinator. She studied the tactical display that Dr. Voss had cobbled together from salvaged components. That's a full battle. Group Vex nodded grimly. Intelligence suggested the hegemony was preparing for something unprecedented, a final solution to their growing resistance problems. If their suspicions were correct, today's inspection was actually a prelude to systematic extermination. All units, maintain normal routines, he broadcast through the hidden communication network. Let them see what they expect to see. The deception was masterful. As hegemony forces deployed throughout the compound, they encountered exactly what their reports had led them to expect: fractured populations engaged in petty territorial disputes, desperate beings scratching out subsistence, existences in the ruins of civilizations. What they didn't see were the quantum communicators hidden in every major settlement, the weapons caches concealed beneath false floors, or the sophisticated early warning systems that had been tracking their approach since they'd entered the system. High Commander Vivek Thal, the hegemony's most ruthless enforcer, toured the facility with casual contempt. His elongated skull bore the neural implants that marked him as one of the hegemony's enhanced administrators. Beings who had surrendered their biological heritage for perfect mechanical efficiency. The facility serves its purpose, he reported to the orbiting fleet. Recommend proceeding with Sanitation Protocol 7. The words sent a chill through the hidden listeners. Sanitation Protocol 7 was a euphemism for complete sterilization, the systematic elimination of all life on the planet's surface. But as Victor's inspection team prepared to depart, something unexpected happened. The facility's ancient defense systems, dormant for decades, suddenly came online. Energy barriers sprang up around the compound, trapping the hegemony forces inside. Now Vex whispered into his communicator. The rebellion revealed itself in a coordinated explosion of action. Hidden weapon caches opened, releasing armaments that had been painstakingly assembled from salvaged components. Caraxian warriors emerged from concealed positions, their bioluminescent threat displays creating a dazzling light show as they engaged enemy forces. The Void Singers materialized from seemingly empty air, their stealth technology allowing them to strike at will. Nethi's quantum specialists began jamming enemy communications while Saurian engineers activated the facility's long-dormant defensive systems. But the real shock came when the humans revealed what they'd been building in the depths of the facility. A massive quantum transmitter, jury-rigged from components salvaged across the compound, burst into life with a frequency that reached across the galaxy. This is Vex Korath, speaking from Quarantine World Epsilon 7. His voice echoed through space, carried by quantum entanglement to every receiver in the galaxy. The hegemony has told you we are criminals, terrorists, threats to galactic peace. They lied. The transmission continued as the battle raged around the compound. We are the survivors of worlds that refuse to submit. We are the voices of species that valued freedom over security. We are the immune system of a galaxy that has been infected by tyranny. High Commander Vikthal found himself trapped in a situation no hegemony protocol had prepared him for. His forces were being systematically eliminated by beings who should have been demoralized and broken. Worse, every action he took was being broadcast across the galaxy for all to see. Surrender now. Vex's voice crackled through the commander's communication system, and your forces will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. Continue fighting, and you'll discover why the hegemony was so afraid of us that they locked us away. The battle was over in 6 hours. The expedition force had been completely neutralized, their equipment captured, their personnel taken prisoner. But more importantly, the quantum transmission had reached its intended targets. Across the galaxy, resistance cells that had been operating in isolation suddenly found themselves part of a coordinated network. The transmission had included detailed intelligence about hegemony weaknesses, tactical information gathered from their own research, and most importantly, proof that the Great Empire could be defeated. Phase 1 complete, reported Astrakelion, her intelligence networks already cataloging responses from across the galaxy. We're receiving confirmations from 47 different systems. The network is active. Vex stood in the facility's command center, watching as status reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The rebellion had begun in earnest, but he knew the real challenge was just beginning. The hegemony would respond with overwhelming force, and Epsilon 7 would become the focal point of a galactic war. Dr. Voss, he called to the chief scientist. How long until the facility's defenses are fully operational? 72 hours, assuming the Galaxians can help us with the heavy lifting. You have it, Colonel Thorne. I want every defensive position fortified. We're about to become the most important piece of real estate in the galaxy. As night fell over Epsilon 7, the energy barrier that had once held them prisoner now served as their shield. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. The hegemony's response came with the fury of a dying star. 57 warships materialized at the edge of Epsilon 7's system, their combined firepower capable of cracking planets. At their head flew the Dominion's Wrath, a super that had never known defeat. Empress Nixthera herself commands the fleet, reported Petty Officer Zara Okonkwo, the rebellion's communications specialist. Her cybernetic implants, remnants of her service in the Terran Navy, flickered with data streams. She's declared this a personal crusade. Vex studied the tactical display, his expression grim. The hegemony Empress was no ordinary opponent, was the architect of the galactic conquest, a being who had personally overseen the subjugation of 300 worlds. Her presence here meant the hegemony viewed the rebellion as an existential threat. They're not just here to destroy us, he murmured. They're here to make an example. The siege began with a bombardment that turned the sky above Epsilon 7 into a hellscape of plasma and antimatter. But the ancient facility's shields held, powered by the same quantum reactors that had once fueled the hegemony's weapons research. Every blast that struck the barrier only seemed to make it stronger. Fascinating, observed Dr. Lyra Voss, monitoring the shield generators from the facility's depths. The barrier isn't just deflecting energy, it's absorbing it, converting it into additional power for our systems. How long can it hold? Asked Nix Valdris, now commanding the rebellion's growing military forces. Indefinitely, as long as they keep shooting at us. The problem is supplies. We have 2 million beings in this facility, and our food production was never designed for a prolonged siege. The siege stretched into its second week, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The hegemony's bombardment continued relentlessly, but the facility's defenses held firm. Meanwhile, the rebellion's quantum transmissions continued to reach across the galaxy, coordinating resistance operations on dozens of worlds. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Grok Moller, the Caraxian war chief, had been studying the captured hegemony personnel with his species' unique approach to intelligence gathering. The prisoners speak of doubt, he reported during a war council. The hegemony's own forces question this campaign. They have never faced unified resistance before. What do you mean? Asked Vex. The hegemony's strength has always been division. They conquer by turning species against each other, exploiting cultural differences, creating conflict. But here, they face something they cannot understand: unity among diversity. The revelation sparked a new phase of the rebellion's strategy. Instead of simply defending Epsilon 7, they began to actively engage with the besieging forces. The facility's quantum transmitters were recalibrated to broadcast directly to the hegemony fleet, carrying a message that would shake the Empire to its core. Soldiers of the hegemony, Vex's voice carried across the void. Look around you. You serve in fleets composed of a dozen different species. You fight alongside beings from worlds that were once enemies. You are proof that unity is possible. The broadcast continued for hours, carried by quantum entanglement, to every ship in the fleet. It spoke of the hegemony's original promise, peace through unity, and how that promise had been corrupted into tyranny through fear. We are not your enemies, the message concluded. We are what you were meant to become. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the hegemony fleet, long-suppressed doubts began to surface. Species that had been conquered generations ago began to remember their heritage. Soldiers who had never questioned their orders began to ask why they were fighting. The first defection came from the heavy cruiser Morthok, whose crew included survivors from the same transport that had brought Vex to Epsilon 7. The ship's captain, a Vrithian named Gactor, had been haunted by the memory of the human prisoner who had never broken under interrogation. This is Captain Gactor of the Morthok. His voice crackled through the fleet's communication network. I withdraw my ship from this action. The hegemony has lost its way. The defection triggered a cascade effect. Within hours, 17 ships had abandoned their positions, their crews refusing to participate in what they now saw as genocide. The hegemony's overwhelming advantage began to crumble as their own forces turned against them. Empress Nyx response was swift and brutal. She ordered the defecting ships destroyed, turning the hegemony's weapons against their own forces. The space above Epsilon 7 became a battlefield where former allies fought for the soul of the galaxy. She's making our point for us, observed Astrakelion as she monitored the battle. Every ship she destroys proves that the hegemony rules, through fear, not loyalty. But the Empress was far from finished. As the rebellion celebrated their unexpected victory, long-range sensors detected something that chilled them to the bone. The hegemony's ultimate weapon, a planet killer, known as the Void Fang, was approaching from the edge of the system. 2 hours until arrival, reported Zara Okonkwo, her voice tight with suppressed fear. The facility's shields won't stop that thing. Vex stood in the command center, watching as the massive weapon approached. The Void Fang was a relic from the hegemony's early expansion, a weapon of such devastating power that it had been used only once before to destroy the homeworld of the Coraxians' ancient enemies. Dr. Voss, he said quietly, do we have any options? One, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But it would require us to overload the facility's quantum reactors. The explosion would take out the Void Fang, but But it would also destroy Epsilon 7 and everyone on it. The silence that followed was deafening. 2 million beings, the last hope of galactic freedom, faced a choice between certain death and certain defeat. It was Grakmaller who broke the silence. There is another way, he said, his mandibles clicking with determination. The Coraxian way. The Coraxian way, as Grakmaller explained it, was both elegant and terrifying. His species had evolved as spacefaring predators, their ships capable of incredible feats of maneuverability, and their warriors bred for zero-gravity combat. But more importantly, they possessed something the hegemony had never encountered: the ability to synchronize their bioluminescent communication across vast distances. Every Caraxian in the galaxy will see what we see, Grokmalar rumbled as his warriors prepared for their final assault. When we strike, they all strike. The hegemony's empire will burn from within. The plan was audacious beyond reason. The Caraxian fighters would launch themselves directly at the Void Fang, their bioluminescent displays creating a beacon that would be visible across the galaxy. The suicide attack would serve as a signal to every Caraxian, still enslaved by the hegemony, to begin simultaneous uprisings. It's madness, protested Nix Valdris. You're talking about throwing away lives for a symbolic gesture. Not symbolic, Grokmalar, corrected Catalytic. The hegemony's strength lies in their belief that resistance is futile. When they see that beings will die rather than submit, that belief will crumble. Vex understood the warrior's logic, but he also saw the flaw in the plan. The signal will reach the Caraxians, but what about the other species? How do we coordinate a galaxy-wide uprising without quantum communicators? The answer came from an unexpected source. The Void Singers, who had remained largely silent during the siege, finally revealed the true extent of their abilities. Their leader, a ethereal being whose name was unpronounceable in any known language, spoke through harmonics that resonated in the quantum foam itself. We are not bound by distance, the entity explained, its voice a symphony of overlapping frequencies. Our consciousness spans the void between stars. We can carry the signal beyond the reach of your machines. The revelation stunned the rebellion's leadership. The Void Singers were not just another species, they were something far more fundamental, beings who existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions. Their ability to communicate instantaneously across galactic distances made them the perfect coordinators for a synchronized uprising. But why now? Asked Dr. Voss. Why reveal this ability when you could have used it at any time? Because now you understand the price of freedom, the Void Singer replied. The Caraxians are willing to die for it. The question is, are you willing to live for it? The next hour was a frenzy of preparation. The facility's quantum transmitters were recalibrated to work in harmony with the Void Singer's abilities, creating a communication network that spanned the entire galaxy. Resistance cells that had been operating in isolation suddenly found themselves part of a coordinated whole. The Void Fang appeared in the outer system like a harbinger of doom, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest hegemony dreadnoughts. The weapon's charging sequence would take 12 hours to complete, giving the rebellion a narrow window to act. All units, this is Vex Korath. His voice carried across the galaxy through the combined efforts of quantum mechanics and psychic resonance. The hegemony has shown us their true face. They would rather destroy worlds than allow them to be free. Today, we show them that freedom cannot be destroyed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, the enslaved rose up against their oppressors. Caraxian bioluminescence painted the void with messages of defiance. Nethi's quantum networks began systematically destroying hegemony communication systems. Saurian saboteurs struck at critical infrastructure with surgical precision, but the masterstroke came from the humans themselves. The intelligence data they had gathered on Epsilon 7 had been carefully analyzed and weaponized. Every hegemony weakness, every psychological pressure point, every tactical vulnerability was exploited simultaneously across hundreds of star systems. The hegemony's command structure is collapsing, reported Astrakelion, her voice filled with wonder as she processed the incoming data. They're losing control of entire sectors. On Epsilon 7, the final phase of the battle began as the Void Fang entered firing range. The weapon's energy buildup was visible even through the facility's shields. A growing ball of annihilation that would soon reduce the planet to its component atoms. Caraxian Strike Force, you are cleared for attack. Vex transmitted, his voice heavy with the weight of sending warriors to their certain death. It has been an honor, replied Grokmalar, his bioluminescent display pulsing with a pattern that would be remembered across the galaxy. Tell the young ones that we chose to be free. The Galaxian fighters launched themselves into the void, their living ships pulsing with synchronized patterns that turned the darkness of space into a canvas of light. Behind them, the entire rebellion watched as heroes flew toward their doom. But as the Galaxians approached the Void Fang, something unexpected happened. The weapon's charging sequence faltered, its energy matrix destabilizing as critical systems began to fail. The massive structure shuddered, its hull plates buckling under internal stress. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Voss. "The weapon is tearing itself apart." The truth dawned on them slowly. The Void Fang was not just a weapon, it was a prison ship, filled with beings who had been enslaved to power its devastating systems. The rebellion's signal had reached them too, and they had chosen to die rather than serve their oppressors. The explosion that followed was visible from across the star system, a nova of light that announced the death of the hegemony's ultimate weapon. But more importantly, it announced the birth of something new, a galaxy where freedom was more important than survival, where diverse species could unite in common cause. As the shock wave dissipated, Vex stood in the command center of what had once been a prison, surrounded by beings who had transformed from prisoners into liberators. The rebellion had won its first major victory, but the war for the galaxy's soul was just beginning. 6 months after the siege of Epsilon 7, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The hegemony's empire, built over centuries of conquest and oppression, had collapsed in a matter of weeks. What remained was a patchwork of free worlds, each struggling to define their own destiny in the aftermath of liberation. Vex stood on the observation deck of the Concordia, the rebellion's flagship, watching as the last hegemony stronghold fell to the combined forces of the Galactic Liberation Alliance. The fortress world of Nexus Prime, once the administrative heart of the Empire, burned with the fires of revolution. "The Hegemony Council has agreed to unconditional surrender," reported Captain Zara Okonkwo, her cybernetic implants flickering with incoming data streams. "Empress Nixthera has been captured by Galaxian forces on the Outer Rim, and the weapon stockpiles," asked Vex, "secured and being dismantled according to the Geneva Accords. Dr. Voss estimates it will take 5 years to neutralize all the biological weapons, but the immediate threat is over." The victory should have felt complete, but Vex found himself troubled by the challenges that lay ahead. Unity in war was one thing. Unity in peace was something else entirely. Already cracks were beginning to show in the alliance as different species pursued their own agendas. "The Saurian enclaves are demanding reparations for their lost colonies," continued Zara. "The Nethes Collective wants exclusive rights to quantum communication technology, and the Galaxians are talking about establishing their own territorial empire." "What about the humans?" asked Vex. "Earth's reconstruction is proceeding ahead of schedule. The colonial authority has been re-established, and they're already sending out new settlement expeditions. But there's pressure from some factions too. Claim former hegemony worlds as compensation for the losses during the occupation." Vex nodded, understanding the temptation. After decades of oppression, it would be natural for the liberated species to seek dominance over their former oppressors. But that path led only to a new cycle of conquest and rebellion. "Arrange a meeting with the Alliance Council," he decided. "It's time to discuss the future." The council chamber aboard the Concordia had been designed to accommodate the diverse physiologies of the Alliance's member species. Environmental controls maintained different atmospheric compositions in various zones, while translation systems rendered speech into hundreds of different languages and communication methods. The debate that followed was intense and sometimes acrimonious. The Galaxians, led by Grok Muller, argued for a return to the old ways, independent species, governing their own territories with minimal interference. The Nethes Collective, speaking through their quantum-linked representatives, advocated for a technological confederation based on shared scientific advancement. The hegemony failed because it imposed unity through force, declared Ambassador Lyra Voss, now serving as Earth's primary representative. We cannot make the same mistake by imposing unity through ideology. But without some form of coordination, we risk fracturing into 1,000 competing factions, countered the Saurian delegate, his reptilian features displaying agitation through color changes. The galaxy needs structure, law, order. The debate continued for hours, with each species presenting their vision of the post-hegemony galaxy. Some wanted revenge against their former oppressors. Others sought to establish new empires. A few even suggested that the old system had been preferable to the chaos of freedom. It was the Void Singer representative who finally provided the solution. The ethereal being's consciousness touched each mind in the chamber, sharing not words but understanding, a vision of what the galaxy could become if they chose cooperation over domination. We propose the Epsilon Accords, Vex announced when the sharing was complete. A framework for galactic governance based on 3 principles: voluntary association, mutual aid, and respect for diversity. The Accords, he outlined, were revolutionary. In their simplicity, there would be no galactic government, no central authority with the power to impose its will on unwilling worlds. Instead, the galaxy would be governed by a network of voluntary associations, each species contributing what they could and taking what they needed. The Caraxians will provide security, he explained. Their warrior culture makes them natural peacekeepers. The Nethys will maintain communication networks, connecting worlds across the galaxy. The Saurians will handle logistics and trade. The Void Singers will serve as mediators when conflicts arise. And the humans, asked Grockmuller, will do what we've always done, Vex replied. We'll adapt, we'll explore, we'll find ways to make the impossible possible. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. The Epsilon Accords were ratified by 73% of the Alliance's member species, establishing the framework for a new galactic civilization. But the real test came in the months that followed. The transition from war to peace proved more difficult than anyone had anticipated. There were revenge killings, territorial disputes, and economic disruptions as former slaves struggled to build new lives. The Alliance mediation teams worked around the clock, but for every conflict they resolved, 2 more seemed to emerge. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On the anniversary of the siege of Epsilon 7, the former prison world had been transformed into something unprecedented, a memorial and meeting place, where beings from across the galaxy could gather to remember the cost of freedom and renew their commitment to peace. 1 year ago, we were prisoners, Vex addressed the massive crowd gathered in the facility's central plaza. Today, we are free. But freedom is not a destination, it's a choice we make every day. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy, carried by quantum transmitters and Void Singer consciousness alike. But more importantly, it was accompanied by a demonstration of what the new galaxy could achieve when species worked together. The memorial itself was a testament to cooperative effort. Caraxian bioluminescence provided eternal flames. Nethi quantum technology created 3-dimensional displays that showed the history of the rebellion. Saurian engineering had carved the names of the fallen into quantum crystal that would last for millennia. And human artistry had woven it all together into something beautiful and meaningful. This is our legacy, Vex concluded, his words echoing across the galaxy. Not conquest or domination, but the simple truth that different species can choose to build something together rather than tear each other apart. As the ceremony concluded, Vex found himself standing alone in the command center where the rebellion had been born. The facility was quiet now, its weapons dismantled and its defensive systems converted to peaceful purposes. But the quantum transmitters still hummed with activity, carrying messages of hope and cooperation across the galaxy. A soft chime announced an incoming message. The holographic display showed a young human face, barely out of adolescence, with eyes that held the same determined fire that had once driven the rebellion. "Commander Korath," the young woman said, "this is Lieutenant Maya Chen of the starship New Horizon. We're about to make first contact with a previously unknown species in the Andromeda Galaxy. Thought you'd want to know where. Doing it right this time." Vex smiled, understanding that the greatest victory